there. Today what we're doing is we're going to be continuing on our business continuity discussion. A few months ago, we interviewed Bailey Zito from Cisco IT, and he was giving us tips on what he was doing within Cisco to really drive forward business continuity. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback about that video interview because this whole thing of sharing best practices has been really important to the community. And today, I'm really pleased that we'll be talking to Mike Hanley, who has taken on the role of Cisco's Chief Information Security Officer.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Hanley. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Cisco. I've been in this role for about 3 months. Prior to that, I spent 5 years inside Duo, building a best-in-class SaaS security team as we scaled that business up, ultimately culminating in the acquisition by Cisco and joining Cisco's Security Business Group, where we've continued to play a role in the discussion we're going to have today, which is driving business continuity, secure work from anywhere, and allowing everyone to help transition to securely working from home in this new environment that we're all trying to experience. So thanks for having me today, Susie.
So Mike, how has your role and your team's focus changed as the pandemic has changed our world?
Yeah, well, Susie, as you know, the business has transformed overnight to working fully remote, collaborating virtually, adopting new ways of working and new ways of interacting with each other and with our customers. So for us, we've really had to think a lot about, we're in a warp speed transformation toward mobile, highly distributed environments that heavily rely on secure collaboration in ways that we never had to previously. So for us, we have to balance between being wary, cautious, and thoughtful about adopting some of these new things and making sure that we're doing them right and in a way that acknowledges the new realities in which we're doing business, but also really a culture shift to being more open, understanding, and forgiving of the types of circumstances that our teams are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Businesses really realize, I think, that they can function now at a full-scale remote work environment. And where we inside Cisco obviously had a strong competency in this previously, that's become obviously a primary focus for us now. But using all of these services at elevated levels and making sure that all the assumptions that we had previously still hold true at scale and at volume is just a big part of the extra thoughtfulness that we need to take at this point.
And from this, as all these changes are going on, what kind of new challenges have emerged?
So with any transformation comes new technologies and adoption of new ways of doing things inside the company. And the most important thing probably to realize is that this is not a temporary state that we're in. I mean, the genie is out of the bottle. We're never going to go back to the way we were completely with 40 hours a week, 5 days a week in the office. So reinventing how we've thought about risk management or frankly revisiting some of the assumptions that we've had previously around the controls that we got from people being on the network or within the four walls that we had a badge reader on the front of. That's not true anymore when we have people working remotely full-time or working from the cabin, working from a coffee shop. This is now the new normal, and making sure that the technologies and services that we use all contemplate that, and we can still achieve the security objectives and properties that we care about, even in a very different setting than what we're used to.
So it's interesting as businesses are transforming, that's actually accelerating their digital transformation, and all of this is going on, and we still need to make sure that we're secure and face those challenges. So what kind of things did you worry about during the pandemic that you didn't have to worry about before?
The biggest one there, Susie, is it's a change in perhaps an existing threat that we all are all too familiar with for folks in my role and other enterprises, and that's the opportunistic attack that comes into play from things like phishing or themed attacks associated with events that are happening around the world. And we've really never in our lifetimes had something that's truly touched everyone on the face of the planet in the way the current pandemic has. And it's, attackers being rational actors, people who are trying to get their jobs done at the lowest cost for the highest return, are going to absolutely, and we've seen it in terms of attacks that we know are facing us and many of my peers in the space, are trying to exploit that very human and natural reaction to the fear and uncertainty that comes from living through a once in a century or more pandemic. So we know that those opportunistic attacks are going to be, in many contexts, potentially much more enticing to a potential victim to click through on that link about the latest news in this space. So we've really had to be thoughtful around how to communicate to our employees what to look for, and also how to address it if they see it. And then we've had to be more thoughtful about what defenses we put in place to actually prevent those things from happening in the first place.
As you've been going through this, like what have you learned? How are you thinking about risk differently?
Probably one of the biggest changes, Susie, is the traditional control set that we rely on from being on network or in four walls is just less relevant than it was previously. So clearly, we still have guards and physical security systems at our sites and data centers, et cetera. Those are still important aspects of how we control things, but where before it might have been a rarity for somebody to work at a coffee shop, that's effectively the new default for everything that we're doing at this point. And that means everything from how people could get shoulder surfed to being on untrusted networks, et cetera. All of these things are ubiquitous, whereas they might have been on the exception basis previously. So for me, thinking about the risks, it's much more about, given the complexity of the traditional, now what I would call home office situation, or frankly, anything remote at this point, it's much more important that we double down and focus on making sure that we do the basics really, really well. So these are things like strong authentication, making sure that we have good network transit between our end users and the services that they're trying to access, that's protected appropriately in transit, and that the devices that people are coming from, whether they're owned by the company or not, meet a really clear standard for what we consider trustworthy.
Yeah, and as you talked about, how do you encourage your clients to be accountable? So if they're doing phishing, malware, and obviously they're installing apps onto their devices as they're working in coffee shops. So can you talk about how you do that?
The most important one, Susie, frankly, is education and awareness. We have, as you know, a very, very large globally distributed workforce. As much as I would like, they will not all ever be software security engineers or have the necessary depth and capability to do so. So my focus is on how do I get actionable information to those folks and make sure that all those employees have a clear expectation on these are the really important security controls and expectations that I need to be aware of. And this is how I know when to get help or when to flag something that doesn't look or smell right. So for me, making sure that the education and awareness piece is really airtight and that people understand what's expected of them independent of what other job duties that they have from a security perspective, getting that list really tight and crisp is very, very important. And a lot of that comes down to a lot of, frankly, what I would call the hand washing of information security, right? So is the device that I'm coming from patched and meet Cisco standards? Do I know where to go if I become aware of a security incident? Do I know where to send reported phishing? And do I know, for example, how to onboard a third-party SaaS vendor that I want to use maybe in a particular part of the business? Making that stuff really, really easy and educating them on the paved path, if you will, is where I like to spend a lot of time. And that will promote accountability naturally.
Have you seen practices that don't work in this space? Like what would you recommend to people to not do for how they engage their employees and clients?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest common mistake, Susie, is frankly complexity. Especially if you consider the world that we're all living in today. We are all under new stressors, complex working environments, complex personal and family arrangements in some cases where we're all working from home. So it becomes very, very important that we're crisp and simple and make security as easy as we possibly can. When we get in situations where we have complex policies or complex procedures that the regular employee needs to follow, it can be very difficult for them to be compliant and meet our expectations if we haven't put the thought into designing those processes in a way that will beget that outcome. So giving them tools, giving them education, giving them awareness to make it actually as easy as possible to get to those outcomes is super critical. And in any place where we think, well, if it's easy for me as a security professional, surely it's easy for the rest of the employee base. It's really important to check those assumptions at the door and put yourself in the seat of the average user or employee who's going to have to consume that data.
If we take a look at kind of the future state, we know that the world has changed and perhaps in some ways changed permanently. So there's a new normal in this post-COVID world. So do you have some thoughts about what this new normal looks like and how you're planning for it?
Yeah, with more work from home customers, partners, and employees, I believe we're going to experience a drastic impact on how we think about infrastructure and application planning for the future for us. And I suspect many of our audience members are doing the same. So thinking more about consuming many more cloud applications, but also consuming more on-demand cloud provisioned infrastructure is probably going to be the new normal. Again, probably a reality that was already emerging, but its full arrival has been accelerated by the pandemic. a remote workforce, a remote first workforce, interestingly, not just in Cisco, where we're clearly all working remotely at this point, but even as I speak to peers and partners in other parts of the industry, many more of them are remote first, and if not remote forever at this point. So that's a pretty significant culture change, but it also causes us to think differently about what are the technologies and practices that we put in place to enable that to be a persistent state for employees. For teams that were already distributed even inside Cisco, I think they've been really happy with, for example, the WebEx experience that we've had. It's great. We have cloud provision WebEx units. I'm using one right now that are directly connected to our WebEx infrastructure. I don't need to worry about whether that's safe and secure. We've got good end-to-end tie-ins with all of our cloud infrastructure so that you and I can have a safe and secure conversation right now or discuss business, which is great. And then one thing to kind of be aware of on the horizon is everybody knows 5G is rapidly making its arrival. And the traditional response is, usually around spectrum or bandwidth and throughput. And yes, those are all things that are super exciting. But what's really interesting to me about 5G, especially as we spend more time working remotely, is we can totally rethink the experiences that 5G allows us to create for our employees and our partners working away from the office. So there's a lot of really exciting technological change to come. But again, thinking differently about all these experiences happening outside of our four walls is the most important thing at this point.
And so next, are there any recommended practices that you have to share for assessing the security of your applications?
Yes. So for us, so Cisco internally has a set of practices and policies and procedures that we use to actually assess the application providers that we use. But I think an important thing for everybody to be aware of is compliance does not necessarily equate to security in all cases. So it's important to make sure that when you're talking to your third-party cloud providers, while they may present you with a certificate of compliance in a given framework, it's good to make sure you still have an understanding of where is my data going, who are your third-party data sub-processors, what is your privacy story? Can you talk to me about how you operate that product securely? Those are all really important things to make sure that you've got a handle on, especially when you're working with third-party SaaS vendors. And you really also want to be mindful of, especially in a remote context, shadow IT, and people are getting creative about how to get things done. You may find some interesting things as you cull expense and purchase order data that have processed through your procurement team, and you'll find applications you did not know that you had. And figuring out how to partner with your friends in IT and procurement and the businesses to route those things through so that they don't bypass the security reviews and processes that keep our information and data safe is also very critical.
I understand you have a 3-step framework. So if you can share your 3-step framework to help other CISOs know what to do and how to do it.
Yes, the 3 steps are relatively simple. So first and foremost, just understanding your business and empathizing with your business partners and stakeholders. We don't live in an ivory tower in security, and we are, very much kind of beholden to and intertwined with the fates and outcomes of all of our stakeholders and all of the employees in the organization. And we have to find solutions that work for everybody and keep the business running at speed and securely. So really getting an understanding of what everybody's priorities are so that you can negotiate those good outcomes and compromises is critical. The second piece I would offer is people are your best defense. You see a lot of things in the security industry where it talks about, users are your biggest weakness, or people make mistakes all the time, and that's going to cause you to have a problem. And I really think about it very differently from that. I really think about how can I arm people as the deputized and extended members of the security team. When I was at Duo, anytime I went to an all hands and stood up on stage, I would say, raise your hand if you're on the security team. And the intention there is to really create the mindset that everybody has agency and ownership in securing the enterprise and protecting all of our assets. Doesn't matter what their job duty is. They will do several things in every day that protect their customers, the company, their reputation, et cetera. So really making sure people feel good about their contributions there is critical, and frankly, rewarding and recognizing good behavior. There is a lot of work, obviously, in the security space around cleaning up problems or managing incidents or responding to threats, but a very inexpensive thing that you can do that has an outsized positive impact is recognize and reward good security behaviors and make it clear that, these are the expectations we have, and this is what good looks like, and people will follow. The third one is really to make sure you focused on the basics. There are a lot of neat technologies, capabilities, and exciting, promising things happening in our space. but think about it as a hierarchy of needs. If you haven't done the foundational and basic pieces of having a security strategy, having dedicated resources, and really doing the basics and fundamentals well, no amount of things that appear sort of near the top end of the pyramid, as neat as they might be, will make up for the fact that not having a strategy or some of these basics in place can sink the ship.
Super, super important. So thank you for sharing all of those. So now, as we're just kind of wrapping up here, what kind of resources can we share with our audience so that they can collaborate securely and really move forward?
The good news is we have a number of great resources on the Cisco Trust Center, and you can reach that by going to trust.cisco.com. There are a couple of guides that our audience might find interesting today. So the first one is remote work, keeping it secure. So we talk a little bit about how we've secured and scaled up our remote workforce in 2020. Top 10 questions to ask about today's video conferencing solutions. So thinking about what, easy to use and intelligible data, scalable systems, and how to keep them secure look like. Keeping yourself connected during the COVID-19 crisis. So tips and tricks on that front. And then also keeping your stay-at-home family cyber safe. So resources, measures that you can use to stay safe while online at home. And all of that and more are available over on the Cisco Trust portal at trust.cisco.com.
Great. Mike, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing all of your insights, all of your experiences, some of the practices that we are putting into place over here. To the audience, I really hope that you find this valuable. I know that many of you are battling how to protect your infrastructure, how to protect your employees, how to keep business running and protect your customers' data. So I hope you found this useful. And once again, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Susie, for having me. It's been my pleasure, and be safe, everyone.